This problem was very much in her mind in late 1844, as she revised her essay on the conditions called, of course, the Great Lawsuit, for publication into the pamphlet that was to be known as Woman in the 19th Century. Published as a 47-page essay in the July 1843 edition of the Dial, the Great Lawsuit had been a spirited but also highly academic discourse in support of female equality, possibly drawing too much on classical allusions and ancient myth. It had, one supposes, contained too much of the library and not enough of the street. Before she could finish transforming the Great Lawsuit into a more comprehensive statement on the nature of woman, Fuller needed to change her focus. That change came when, shortly before moving to Manhattan to begin work at Horace Greeley's New York Tribune, Fuller took a vacation on the Hudson and paid a series of visits to Mount Pleasant, the women's division of Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York. At Mount Pleasant, Fuller was particularly captivated by the thoughts of female sexual criminals, those who had been jailed for acts of prostitution. Before her visits, Fuller's principal source of information about the inmates was Georgiana Bruce, a late resident of Brook Farm, who, at Fuller's prompting, had signed on as an assistant to Eliza Farnham, the prison's recently appointed matron. Farnham, a liberal reformer, had taken immediate steps to better the moral condition of the prisoners. Prior to Farnham's arrival, the more indecent of the inmates had routinely, quote, made the night hideous by singing blasphemous and obscene songs, and had once even risen up in rebellion, attacking the preceding matron and actually ripping the clothes from her body. In her letters to Bruce, Fuller asked what the prisoners actually thought about sexual morality. She inquired, "You say few of these women have any feeling about chastity. Do you know how they regard that part of the sex who are reputed chaste? Do they see any reality in it, or look on it merely as a circumstance of condition, like the possession of fine clothes? You know novelists are fond of representing them as if they looked up to their more protected sisters as saints and angels." Bruce replied by sharing some of the inmates' journals with Fuller, who was particularly impressed with the reflections of an African-American woman named Satira, whose, quote, idealizing of herself in the face of cruelest facts, unquote, belonged, according to Fuller's estimate, quote, to the fairest, most abused part of feminine nature, unquote. Now that Satira could still respect herself, despite her erstwhile profession and her current imprisonment, astonished Fuller. Here was a woman who stood little different in the sight of the world from that wretched girl in Groton, yet who seemed confident enough to shrug away any suggestion of reproach. Whereas most people would surely have credited a depravity in Satira's ethical opinions, Fuller wanted to know whether the ex-prostitute's self-idealization rose from a moral possibility that Fuller herself had failed to consider. Having acquired much of her knowledge by bookish means, Fuller was quickly being cured of her romantic misconceptions. It began to seem to her that chastity was merely an appurtenance of social standing, imbued with only that degree of value that one's fellows were inclined to acknowledge. She pressed on with her inquiries. Bruce obligingly relayed Fuller's questions to some of the inmates and was quite astonished when one of the more intelligent women spoke her mind. "Of course," the prisoner exclaimed. "Everybody in the world knew that promiscuity was wicked. However, if no one knew, it was as if the sin did not exist. Rather, you did not, quote, you did not seem a bit different from anybody else. In fact, you did not stop to think of yourself at all," unquote. It was very curious, this woman reflected, quote, that your being ashamed was caused by people knowing your life, not by the life itself, unquote. When pressed, the woman added that she and her fellow inmates recognized Mrs. Farnham and Miss Bruce as good, but not because of their sexual mores. In the eyes of the inmates, the goodness of their overseers lay in their refinement, their sincerity, and their selflessness, not in their reputation for being chaste. Well, these observations were not very comfortable for Miss Bruce to contemplate. She concludes her account of the episode in her memoirs with the peremptory statement, quote, "It is best not to dwell on this subject."